Welcome back. Our next speaker is Michael Hennessy from Teagasc in Ireland. It's the national body for integrated research, advisory, and training services for the agriculture industry, food services, and rural communities. He's going to talk about innovation, adoption, and research throughout Ireland.
Okay, good morning. My name is Michael Hennessy. I'm the head of Crops Knowledge Transfer in Teagasc. I'm delighted to be with you this morning and really delighted to be asked to give this presentation. So I'm going to present a number of things around, I suppose, a little bit around Ireland, a little bit around Teagasc, which is the organization that I work for, and then a little bit around kind of the crop sector, the tillage sector here in Ireland. And then I'm going to finish off by just chatting about a couple of different projects that we work with, which really does, I suppose, emphasize somewhere around the title of my slides, which is trying to integrate the research with knowledge transfer to try and get impact on the ground. Okay, so we'll start off at the beginning, as they say, and I suppose the big thing about it is that Canada is very big and Ireland is quite small. About 12% in terms of area, but in fairness, the Canadians have way more area in terms of per person than we do. There's only 5 million of us, give or take, whereas you certainly seem to have way more space than we have, I suppose, per se. So, look, I suppose in the grand context of things, we were quite small. And I suppose, look, you have to think of us kind of in that area, but nonetheless, we might be small, but our farmers are well able to farm to their very high standards. Okay, so that's just to give you a bit of background. So another bit of background really on Ireland and Irish agriculture. I suppose it would be known far and wide for its green image. We have 40 shades of green, as they say, and we certainly do have that pretty much all year round. We very rarely, if ever, get snow, so we're pretty well green the whole time round. And I suppose on the other side, we don't get too much droughts or that kind of thing either. So give or take on a few of the screens is there from our own central statistics office. It's about 135,000 farms, and of that, about 4.5 million hectares of agricultural land that can be farmed. The biggest end of what we do, in fairness, is probably our cattle, which is made up for dairy cows and beef cattle. That's probably their biggest export, which would include the dairy products, which is kind of butter and Bailey's cream, Irish cream, you might know it as well, Kerrygold butter, but also milk powder and baby infant formula would be the other big thing. Our beef herds very much export a huge amount of beef all the way across Europe. Our cereal end of it would be quite small. That's why it doesn't really even overly massively register there, about 265,000 hectares. So it's quite small, all in all. But that being said, as I go through it now in a few minutes, it's actually a very productive area. So from the point of view then of Teagasc, so Teagasc is an Irish name for instruction. So basically what we are is we are a national body funded through, we're a semi-state body of the government. So what semi-state means is we have some government funding, and we rely on funding coming from either research or from farmers. So farmers get paid, if you like. So in terms of what we are about, we come up with all these fancy statements and that kind of stuff. But look, our overall mission is to provide scientific leadership and support to Irish farmers and food companies to achieve a sustainable food system. And I suppose, look, that's what is at the central core of what we are about, certainly for the last number of years. And I would imagine until I retire at some stage or other in the next 20 years or 30 years, is around sustainability. And it really is, our strategic overarching goal is around sustainability of all the activities that Teagasc are involved in and that we're trying to promote. It's certainly a huge part of it. And look, we have lots of strategic goals in terms of improving farmers' living standards and well-being, to enhance the production. But at the core of what we do is around providing science-based evidence so that any new technologies are very well proven and can be implemented on the ground with farmers. That's a huge thing about what we're trying to do, whether that's the innovation part of it or existing technology. It needs to be science-based. And we very much come from an independent point of view to delivering that. Okay, So just give you an idea, like we're set up as an act in terms of the legislation within the Irish government. So we have a mandate, if you like, in legislation. In the way our organization is organized, we're probably one of the few organizations around the world that has, I suppose, all of the major elements required under the one umbrella. So we have a research directorate, we have a knowledge transfer or advisory director, if you like. We also deal with education. So we kind of deal with all of those three major ones, and the other kind of end of it is administration to do with the administration one. But the major ones there are research, advisory, and education. So from our point of view, or as farmers look at us, we take them from their exit from secondary school as 18-year-olds. We can train them to a certificate or advanced certificate level all the way up to degree level. We then welcome them, I suppose, in as farmers or people in the industry. We then interact with them at that stage through our advisory program, all the way through their careers, and we deal with a lot of farmers in around succession and, I suppose, passing on to the next generation. So we kind of see farmers, if you like, from the very beginning to the very end. And in the middle then, we have kind of research that we try to implement or try to develop and try and find new stuff that's more suitable for an Irish setup, but then try to make sure that is implemented onto the farms. So you might have heard of the ACUS, or the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, and I just wanted to show you this this schematic basically, which gives you an idea about where we are in relation to the entire ACUS. And the ACUS really is everybody that's in the agricultural community, industry, if you like, that's interacting with farmers. So it's everybody at every junction. So if you like, in the middle here, and I hope you can see the mouse, the red button there, if you like, is the farmers themselves. So that's from a farmer's point of view, as a farmer is looking out to everybody out there. So a farmer will be looking out, and he has, you know, more than likely there'll be professional people the farmer will interact with, whether it's accountants, solicitors, or that kind of stuff. Very much the input supply companies for seeds and fertilizer, etc. We have insurance companies and the processors for dairy and various other different pig meat and various other different things like that. We then have the consumers, obviously on the ground, who buy most of the stuff, into the media. But then we have, I suppose, two big nodes, if you like, and the bigger the node there are here, that these are, I suppose, the bigger the influence they have on the farmers. So the farmer organization certainly is a pretty strong one still in an Irish context. But from the point of view then of Teagasc, so the farmer, I suppose, interacts with Teagasc primarily through the Teagasc advisory system, but also throughout their careers from the education point of view. And then we very much feed through from the research through our advisory across into farmers or into the industry, if you like. So we have connections to all of these various different things. And as you can see, probably going up from a farmer's point of view, but also kind of from our point of view, we have all the government agencies and the funding bodies, which tend to be government agencies. And then at the very tip top up there, we have the European Union, which does put a lot of legislation, goals, targets that we as a country should meet, that trickles down all the way down to the farmer. So that's kind of where we sit as an organization within that ACUS infrastructure. Okay. So coming back to Teagasc then, in terms of where are we all around the country. So we're essentially, each of these individual red dots is a location, a physical location that we're located at. Each of the bright red ones are advisory offices. This is where I'm situated here in Oak Park in Carlow, right down just south of Dublin. So we have Dublin up here, the capital of Ireland. So about an hour or so down from Dublin is kind of where I am, which kind of gives you a bit of scale of how big the country is. We have a number of research centres. The one for crops is here. The one for beef is up here, and the one for dairying, which is very much the dairying industry, is all the way down here. So we have 52 advisory offices. We have a number of colleges, both our own colleges and private colleges, that are all connected into the education system that we provide. And there's 7 major research centers. So in total, I suppose from the advisory service first, there's about 265 advisors out there, with some support people then on top of that, bringing up to around 300. In terms of clients, if you remember, I said we've got about 120,000 farmers, give or take, out there. We deal with about 44,000 of them. So roughly speaking, I suppose in Ireland, there's about 65 to 70 commercial farmers out there. So guys who are, who derive the majority of their income from farming. So we deal with the majority of those guys. The other types of farmers are kind of very much sort of hobby, or very much very, very small part-time farmers. So we deal with a huge amount of farmers out there. In terms of research, we have a very big research outfit as well, which deals with everything from sheep research to cattle to beef, into food. We have a very big program in that, into economics. So we have a very broad range of research going on out there. So we have it's quite a big constituent of what we do. And I'm going to more focus on not the entire research. I'm going to more focus to come back just a little bit as regards how on the crops. But first of all, just in terms of integrating some of this research, because we're such a large organization and integrated and connected to so many farmers, we do put a lot of emphasis on the working with the farmers and learning how farmers implement the technologies we're bringing to them, but also learning how the implementation throws up some new problems that we then help to try and feed back into the researchers. I'll come back to it in a second, but we do have maybe something quite special maybe in our organization, which is maybe different to an awful lot of other structures that might be out there in advisory services, or in research and advisory services. We have an entire service in the very center here, which is called a specialist service. So basically, we have, this is, I suppose, can often happen on a number of in countries, I suppose, and as much as organizations, where you have a lot of good research going on one side, and the researchers are doing a great job, but the researchers tend not to have a great outlet to bring the information to farmers. And then you can often have a scenario on the other side where you have advisors and farmers, and they just don't know how to get access to that research. So within Teagasc, we have a core of about 50 or 60 staff who work as specialists, as if you like intermediates between the research and the advisory side of the house. And they work, and I'm a part of that specialist core. Myself and my team work in the crops end of it. And what we do is we try to make sure that we take the best from research and push it across to farmers, and vice versa, try to bring the problems that's on the ground from advisors and farmers back into research. And I suppose our real aim is to ensure that some of the information that's coming from our research is relevant, it's timely, but also that it is it's implementable, if you like, on the ground. That the type of technology can meld into the technology that's there on farm at the moment, to make sure, I suppose, that we can provide strategies. Putting research together is not just about pushing it out. You need to put it together in a bit of a strategy so that a farmer can actually utilize it, or advisors can utilize it on the ground. So that's a big area that seems to work really well for our organization. And with the result, there isn't a huge divide between research and advisory. We tend to be quite close. And this is just an example of a good few people who are in I suppose the advisory, in the close crops and research advisory team. So we're a small country, but a tight-knit group of people to try and get most of that information out. In terms of the research then, as you can see by some of these numbers, Teagasc, I think, very much punches above its weight, certainly within Ireland for a start, certainly within Europe, but it also has a bit of an impact on a world scale. That we, for the amount of research, and I'd be very proud of this in terms of my own colleagues, for the amount of research colleagues who are there, they produce some very hard-hitting and high impact research that's that gets a lot of traction all the way across the world, and certainly in the food research end of the house, but also in some of the genomics, not just only with crops, but also very much in line with cattle, and some major techniques in terms of how you measure a population of or a herd, if you like, of cattle or sheep out there, and we seem to be able to do that quite well. So we produce a lot of really good research, and our challenge, I suppose, is to make sure as much of that research is implemented on the ground for Irish farmers that we can. So we put a big effort into trying to do that. So in terms of crops research, then, so we call it crops for tillage here in Ireland. So in terms of the crops research, in terms of how we're funded, so it's about 60% of the funding within Teagasc comes internally or from the Irish government, if you like, from national funds, and the final 40% comes from external funding. So that could come from, like I say, farmers pay a fee who are our clients, but we also raise money through research grants through either the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency here in Ireland, or Science Foundation Ireland, which is another Irish body, our parent company, the Department of Agriculture, or a big element of where we can get a good bit of funding is research projects through Horizon 2020. So by the time you add all of those up with farmer-based income, we tend to we raise about 40% of our money each year. So in terms of the resources for the crops research end of it, so again, we're in Carlow, right in this kind of where I am here. We've quite a large farm here, 220 hectares, which we use for replicated trials. But we're also tend to bring some of those results that are closer to farmers out into the farming community on farmers' ground, onto commercial sites. So we can go all the way from kind of up the northeast up here, then to the south and into the southeast. So we use that quite a bit where we need to, I suppose, really show farmers where technology actually work in their own fields. And we try to use that for best practice in demonstrating that with our advisors on the ground and with their various different groups that they're connected with. So our approach to knowledge transfer, I suppose, really comes along these lines, and in concentric rings in terms of how a message is transmitted all the way across the industry. So we have research farms, as in Oak Park, where I am at the moment, do a lot of the replicated trials, which are scientifically valid. We then try to push those out onto demonstration farms, and I'll come to a demonstration farm afterwards in terms of what we're actually doing. We are very big practitioners, if you like, of discussion groups. So we have each advisor out there would have between 2 and 3 discussion groups, and each of these discussion groups would have about 20 or 25 people in them. And we very much try to, they're kind of the leaders, I suppose, in most of the communities. And we very much try to make sure that they are well informed, the earlier adopters, to push it out then a little bit further into our contracted clients. And by the time we've all this demonstration going on, and with all the other channels that we use, whether it's newsletters or national newspapers or radio or TV or podcasts or various other different things we use, we hope that that'll permeate out into the entire industry to affect an overall change. So that's the biggest thing, or that's the really one huge way we do it. And we have certainly lots of activities on a one-to-one basis, whether it's livestock or crops. We, as I said earlier, we deal in farm business and succession from one generation to the next. Our role is becoming bigger and bigger in terms of the last 3 here, in terms of environment and sustainability. It's certainly becoming a much bigger part of what we do. And I suppose because of the various different options and streams of money that are there, the diversification options are certainly becoming more and more a part of all farmers' incomes. But we just can't get around it. But the farm schemes and regulation and compliance are becoming a much, much bigger year-on-year part of what a farmer needs to do. And as a consequence, our advisors are getting more and more involved with them. We do join up with industry where we can, and we've many joint industry programs where we try to identify a project that both Teagasc and the industry can can both buy into, and we put a bit of funding together, and we drive on and try to make sure that is implemented. And look, we do the same as pretty much your own advisory service over there. Lots of public events, lots of communication, whether it's from podcasts all the way through to radio interviews or newsletters and all those various different things. So we use all the communication channels, including social media, the whole way through. So I suppose the thing about it is that since I certainly started a good number of years ago in the advisory service, the way of transferring knowledge to farmers has probably changed. I suppose maybe if you go back even a little bit previous to me, maybe 40 years ago, it was very much a one-way transfer. It was kind of the expert to the end user, and the advisor was the instructor, if you like, to kind of a very different way of looking at it now, which now is almost like a two-way exchange. So what we're trying to do, I suppose, and I mentioned discussion groups earlier, we try to use a combination of both, whereby there is there's that little bit of an expert, but there's also, we use the advisor as a facilitator, so that where we have adoption of some of these new techniques by farmers, that the most powerful way of getting another farmer to adopt that is by one farmer interacting with the other farmer. So we try very much to be the facilitator in the middle of that process, and it seems to work quite well. So that's just a little bit about Teagasc and kind of what we do. I'm going to go back a little bit now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Irish tillage sector, or the crop sector, whichever you like. So this is a report from Michael Wallace done a couple of years ago, and it gives you an idea about the size of the output from our tillage sector, from either potatoes, fodder, crops, most of it's, I suppose, in cereals. But I suppose really what it comes down to is it's actually quite a big multiplier effect that's equivalent to 1.3 billion euros per annum, and employs somewhere around 11,000 full-time employees equivalent. So it's even though it's small, it's still quite a significant contributor to everything. So if you can remember some of those figures, just to give you an idea, in terms of the overall land use I mentioned earlier, about 4.4 million hectares, there's about 80, but probably actually 92 or 3% of that is grass. That's why Ireland is green, I suppose, from one year to the other. So we don't have a huge amount of tillage. It's about 6-7% year on year, give or take. So it's a small part of the overall output from the tillage sector. So to give you an idea as regards to various different crops that we can grow, and you have to bear in mind, I suppose, we are a temperate climate, but we wouldn't be overly warm. So there's a number of crops that just really don't suit us. We're just not warm enough for it. So we're not warm enough for soya as yet. We're really not warm enough to grow grain maize. We can grow forage maize, and we can get up to about 50% dry matter in the cobs, but we're just not good enough to be, not dry enough, not warm enough to be able to grow normal grain maize. But what we do grow very well is we grow cereals very well. We grow wheat. It's mostly, and all of these pretty much are for feed, because we tend to get relatively high yields. So winter wheat, winter barley, spring barley, and winter and spring oats tend to be the bulk of what we have. With the likes of beans and oilseed rape increasing a little bit over the last couple of years, given the price of oils and proteins over the last couple of years. So our climate tends to be really wet, so it rains a lot, and I think there's a saying, something along these lines, that there's only 3 types of weather in Ireland. It's either raining, or it's just stopped raining, or it's just going to rain. So there's only 3 types, and chances are rain is not too far away. With the result, look, in some of these parts of the country, you can see 3.6 meters of rain in some of the really wettest parts of the country, where it's kind of more the hills, getting down to somewhere around between 1,000 to 1,200 mils of rain in areas like this. So there's very few parts of the country that doesn't get a reasonable amount of rain distributed all the way across the year. And obviously that has, there's a line down through the country here, which really is to the right hand side is really where we're able to grow the crops, because it's that bit drier, and to the left hand side is really where it's that much wetter, ground stays wetter for an awful long time, and it's just harder to grow cereals over there. So with the result, the majority of the cereals are this side of the country. Anything that's kind of in yellow and red here denotes that's where the majority of tillage crops are grown. So you can see the majority of them, if you draw a line from here down as far as Cork, from just little north of Dublin being here, all the way down to here, the majority of it is of tillage is in this area. So that's where we actually grow it. And there's a big blank spot here. That's because that's the Wicklow Mountains. It's full of quite high mountains there. So it's not something we can do. So yeah, it's I suppose in some counties it's quite a large amount of tillage, but there's no county would have any more than 25% tillage as regards to total land area. But in total, as I said to you, overall, we're only about 7% of the entire area of Ireland will be under crops at any one time. But even though it's a small area, our average yields are really good. So this here gives you a 5-year average from the FAO stat in terms of the average yields from the various different countries. So I just put this together. So you can see we're the highest yielder in the world for barley and the second highest yielder in the world for wheat, although that flips around between ourselves and New Zealand. This year our yield was 11 tons per hectare, so we're very much higher again. So it's so we have a huge potential to grow crops, but look, it is at a cost. And the costs are a number of things, because, and again, going back up to this, the reason we can grow these really big yields, I suppose, are 2 or 3-fold. One is that we have water. That's the first and foremost. If you don't have water, you're not going to grow a whole lot. But 2, that we have a well educated and a well-run tillage industry that lays the foundations to be able to realize those yields. I think that's enormously important that people have the ability to be able to do it. But the other cost is, because of the fact that it rains quite a lot, our windows to get work completed are quite narrow. So we have some very high cost in the system for machinery, because you need larger machinery for smaller area to try and get over that work. But again, because it rains, we have other problems, wet weather diseases being certainly one of them. So we suffer very, very badly from Rhynchosporium and net blotch in barley, and Septoria in wheat would be 2 of the biggest ones. And we can see in wheat, for instance, we could see a yield response to fungicides in wheat of up to 5 tons per hectare. So it's pretty devastating if it comes in. But nonetheless, where we, as I say, this year in 2022, which was an excellent year, the average yield of winter wheat this year was about 5 tons per hectare, and the average yield for spring barley was a little over 8. So they really blew it out of the park this year altogether. However, the other cost is compliance. So what you have here is it looks like a whole jumble of words on this particular screen, but we do get, and I suppose from you looking into farmers across in Europe, you might be saying, well, that's all well and fine, lads, but you get an awful lot of support from the government, either the EU or national government, in terms of income support. And yes, certainly the farmers do, but you can break that down into a whole heap of areas. There's the direct income from BIS and CRIS. And these are all acronyms for various different things. There's an eco scheme that you need to do to achieve BIS and CRIS. There's an environmental scheme called Acres. There's a capital investment scheme called TAMS for young farmers coming into the system. There's another scheme for those. We do have a bit more support there in the system for protein aid, or to grow legume crops. And there's a little bit of support in the system to incorporate crops, or incorporate straw to capture more carbon and put it into the soil. However, you can't claim any of these particular supports unless you comply with all of the mandatory rules there, as you see them there on the right-hand side. So they're divided into 2. So there's statutory management regulation or requirements, which is SMRs, and you have good agricultural environmental conditions. And I've only given you the highlights as regards what most of these are about, and you can read down through them all. But just to give you 1 or 2, there's a good bit there in terms of SMR1 around pollution of water. So there's very defined amounts of nitrates that can be applied to each individual crop. of which are restricted, so you can't put on as much as you want. And there's restrictions around where you can place them, how close to rivers you can place them. There's when you work all the way down as far as SMR 10 down here for plant protection products, there's an enormous amount of rules around what you can and you can't do with plant protection products in terms of buffer zones, in terms of the application, in terms of the crop they can be applied to, in terms of the rate you apply them, and all of those things. Coming back over here to protecting of groundwater, making sure soil is covered over winter, making sure that the soil organic matter levels are maintained. And we have a thing where we have to retain the landscape feature. So even though you might have seen our farms are quite small, fields then by extension are quite small, so we can't really remove and make fields really, really big like you might have maybe in your part of the world, or maybe across in Eastern Europe. We're stuck to what we have. So even though we get supports, huge amount of rules to be implemented. I suppose really income, but they are a compensation for the income is in compensation for implementing all of these. To give you an idea in terms of our survey, with just in terms of some of our income from our farms. So tillage farming would be behind specialist dairy farming, as you can see there. But I suppose the incomes are fairly steady, and both of them have gone up a little bit in 2021 with the rising prices. But I suppose more importantly, in terms of the income per labor unit, tillage is actually, our crop sector is very similar to the dairy sector in terms of the hours put in, of which you can see here that the tillage put in less hours for the same given area than our dairy colleagues. This is the farmers on the ground put less hours on a per yearly basis. And down here you can see that farmers in the dairying side of things, they might be earning more money, but they're a lot more stressed in comparison to tillage farmers. So, I suppose for the given hours, tillage farmers can earn around as much money per labor unit they're going to put into it, and it seems to be a little bit less stress to do it, and takes them a little bit less to do it. So, from that point of view, tillage farmers still quite attractive here in Ireland. I mentioned some of the regulations that are there already. There's more. And some of the other ones that are there is that we need to reduce some of the emissions by 25% in Ireland, and that's the greenhouse gas emissions. And on top of that, we need to reduce our fertilizer inputs by about 20% and our pesticides by about 50%. And we have a huge amount of work to do in terms of our water quality. And when saying that, our water quality is still very, very good, but it could be that little bit better. And you can see all the blues are pretty good, but all the yellows and reds are not so great, and they need to decrease the nitrogen, specifically certainly in the southeast, in terms of the nitrates concentrate in the water. So we need to do more on that. So loads of challenges still to come. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions equivalent per hectare, our tillage farms are somewhere around 2.6. This is a specialist tillage farm, and I'll explain a little bit more in a second. In comparison to our well, actually we look all the way across here, 2.5 in comparison to our dairy farmers equivalent is 9.4 tons per hectare of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's nearly it's nearly 4 times the amount. So tillage farming is relatively low greenhouse gas. And I suppose in terms of the other side of it, the nutrient balance is pretty good. We don't tend to tend to be quite efficient in terms of the balance is not huge. There's nearly 70% nutrient use efficiency in tillage farming in comparison to dairy, which is only a little under 25%. So it's actually not wonderful. But if we actually look at what actually comes from the tillage farm in terms of greenhouse gas, because our specialist tillage farms, there's quite a bit of livestock on some of those farms, because there's a nice bit of mixed farming going on. If we break that out, the actual tillage greenhouse gas is only 0.8 of a ton per hectare of greenhouse gas equivalent per hectare. The rest is made up by livestock, so it is quite low in comparison. Okay, we're kind of flying for time, so I'm just going to give you a very quick run through maybe a couple of various different things we're doing in terms of projects. One I'm going to highlight is our Signpost Farm program. And essentially this is around, and I mentioned it earlier, it's around, we have a huge mandate to make sure all of the factors I talked about a second ago in terms of sustainability, we drive that through farmers. So there's big targets. We need to be reduce greenhouse gases by 25%, which the livestock sector needs to do the majority of the lifting on that. So we have an entire industry program, which is all of these companies here are all of the major companies and companies in Ireland. We're partnering up with Teagasc to try and I suppose convince farmers to adopt some of the technologies. So we're trying to do that by training, putting on farm sustainability plans for up to 50,000 farmers in the next 5 years. They will get an annual sustainability report. We'll make sure that's as digital as we can. We've lots of events and farm research and discussion groups. So we're trying all the methods that we can to try and make sure that we try and hit the targets that have been outlined for the industry. I'm not going to go through all of those because I think I've described most of them, but essentially a lot of it is capacity building, is trying to get that knowledge across to farmers so farmers can take on the newer technologies and reduce those emissions on farm, so we can be in line, I suppose, with all of the emission targets, not just in Ireland, but across Europe and worldwide. So essentially, on the Signpost Farms, and we have a network of farms all the way across the country. And what we do is we are coming up with lots of these sustainability plans, but as part of that, we're also trying to see where the carbon is in it. So we have this National Agricultural Soils Carbon Observatory. So we're looking at taking shallow soil samples, but also deep soil samples in combination with with flux towers. And the flux towers basically take the carbon dioxide that's coming off those fields, and kind of in both directions, and kind of measuring what those are. So in various different systems, whether it's a crops or a tillage system or in a grassland system, we can actually get a more accurate view about how much carbon is either being sequestered or taken off those systems, so that we can use the Irish figures rather than the international IPCC figures. So it's a big part of what we're trying to do. This gives you an idea in Ireland where all these farms are, and I've just pointed to some of the farms that we're working with in terms of the tillage end of it. So we've grain farmers in no-till and potatoes and malt and barley. We've all the various different farms out there to try and use those as demonstration farms. So for the farmers, we set them up with a nutrient management plan for the year, which we need to take some soil samples for. We have a look at them in terms of the overall sustainability on the farm, in terms of how their rotation and various different things like that. We look at the biodiversity on the farm, and we also give them a report at the end of the year, which is like a benchmarking report to see how they are against their colleagues, I suppose, across the country, of which there's 110 of them. And we're trying to demonstrate on those farms what the good practice that farmer is doing, implementing the new technologies on that farm, and farmers coming in to see that not just can see it, but can see there's a measurable part of that on it as well. So to give you an idea on some of the farms, I'm not going to go too heavy into this, but once you're in index 3, you're exactly where you need to be in terms of your phosphate index, and the same as your K. So we have a little bit of work. A good few of them, about 60% of them have a good status, and there's a good few of them that probably need to improve a little bit in terms of P and K, but generally a lot of them are kind of there in the right direction. In terms of soil organic carbon, because we've a wetter country, we don't tend to burn carbon as much as maybe a dry continental type climate. So our soil organic carbon tends to be that little bit higher, between 2 to 4%. Anything under 2 would be regarded as very low in this part of the world. We try a lot to improve water, and this is our biggest problem. The likes of very heavy rain and water swishing away from fields and bringing soil with it. So there's loads of help from the state in terms of various different maps which show the various how water runs off the surface. And what we try to do is we try to use the best of all the technologies that are there to come up with maps and help farmers come up with ways, physical ways, that they can stop that runoff, to make sure that we improve water quality along the way, which translates itself into action plans, of which we try to implement on we write up in consultation with every farm and try to make sure they're agreed and implemented on the farm over the year. And I mentioned the sustainability report, and these are the kind of reports that we agree with farmers, and we try to bring back the results of those farmers every year. Okay. Again, this is just a little bit of the results from our Signpost tillage farmers in 2021. I suppose a couple of things you might notice here is the winter wheat yields. I mentioned 11.1 tons this year. Our average chemical nitrogen use ratio was 138 kilos. Now there's organic manure to go in on top of that as well, and a fairly decent family farm income on it as well. A couple of very small things, and I know I'm kind of running out of time a little bit. We have another quite a big project on conservation tillage. In Ireland, that's not practiced very much at all. We're very much a plough-based system, as in turning over the ground. But there's a number of farmers want to try it out, but the biggest challenge we have is actually managing grass weeds coming into those systems. So we have bromes and other grass weeds that come in and tend to take over in these systems if they're not managed quite carefully. So a large part of what we were trying to do is we were trying to add to existing knowledge by co-creating solutions with farmers on the ground. So we have 10 farmers around the country that we're working intensively with. And again, we're using those guys as demonstrator farmers, so other farmers can come in and see the solutions in this particular end of what we're trying to do. And we're trying to fill in some missing knowledge gaps as regards herbicide resistances out there, and how or why some farmers succeed in managing these weeds, whereas others don't. So just one of our fields we're tracking all the way across the year. We're going out and counting the various different plant numbers. We're implementing some farm actions on the ground, such as stale seed beds or spring cropping or increasing seed rates, etc. And you can see going from 2019 to 2020, we're seeing quite a difference in terms of the overall reduction, 50% reduction just in the 1 year by changing some for the most part, cultural practices to try and reduce those weeds on farm. And we're having some nice results with those and getting that across to farmers. So the other part of that is we're doing lots of resistance testing, getting farmers and advisors to send us in resistance tests of which we grow up, do the molecular analysis to it, and basically it ends up in kind of a nice table such as this for farmers, whereby we've some of the various different major weeds here, wild oats or blackgrass or sterile brome, and we have some of the various different chemistries. Here's the AC case and the ALS, what's resistant and what's not to some of the weeds that we have here in Ireland. So we try to get that across to the entire community out there as well. The last one I'm just going to talk about very briefly is barley yellow dwarf virus, which is a virus that's spread by aphids, popping onto crops from going from one to the other. And you can see in this picture here, all the yellow bits here, that's basically where the aphids came in and they actually spread the virus. The ones that don't have it more than likely got an insecticide at the right time. So basically there's loads, there's about 2 real major types of aphid species that spreads BYDV. Unfortunately, there's 10 different types of BYDV. Some are mild and some are severe. It can result in yield losses up to 80%. We also have insecticide resistance in some of these guys. And we've lots of other complications, like some of them carried really well and spread it really well, others don't. So we've a lot of work to do to try and figure out how we come up with a plan. We've put in place, in terms of research point of view, they're called towers, 12.2 meter towers to suck in. So there's a big Dyson Hoover underneath that to suck down 24/7 so aphids are flying along to get sucked down to the middle of this. We can then bring them out, count them, see what aphids are there, and it gives us an idea as regards the amount of aphids that are around. The thing about aphids are they like nice warm weather. So the higher temperature is, the more aphids you tend to get. And they don't like cold weather. So by the time you get to November, December, there's almost no aphids being caught whatsoever. So there's a way that we can actually track them a little bit with weather, but it's certainly not precise enough. And you can see it in here in terms of suction tower. The warmer it gets and the bigger the bubble it is, the more aphids that are around. Whereas they don't like the rain. The more it's going to rain, the less aphids that are going to be out there. So we have an idea about what influences them, but we just want to get a bit more exact. At the moment, our recommendations basically is so later in the autumn time because the aphids are stopped flying, and so earlier in the springtime because there's no aphids around to fly. So that's the kind of I suppose in a very simplistic way, best cultural way of trying to control aphids out there at the moment. But what we want to try and get to is a more precise integrated pest management program, so that we can use these towers with some of the yellow traps around them and some of the PCR techniques that we're developing that will be able to detect from a single mash of stuff coming out of these towers or out of the yellow traps, be able to tell the type of aphids that's in there, whether they're resistant or not to insecticides, what load of virus they're carrying, and what type of virus they're carrying, which will then help to make a decision for a farmer on the ground as regards whether it needs to spray or not. So I probably said enough. That's a huge amount of stuff the whole way through. And thank you very much. And any questions?
Thank you, Michael, for such an interesting presentation. Don't miss out on the live Q&A session. There's a link right below this video, and you'll be able to click in there to join the Zoom session. You can ask him questions in person.